we're not talking about conventional wisdom today. In fact, our guest today wants to talk about the 9 lies about work. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We have a great guest today, and we're going to talk about his new book, which is controversial. How about that, everybody? So my guest today is Ashley Goodall, and he is the Senior Vice President of Leadership and Team Intelligence at Cisco. In this role, he has built a new organization focused entirely on serving teams and team leaders, an organization that combines talent management, people planning, org design, succession, coaching, assessment, executive talent, research, analytics, technology, and probably more than that, actually. Prior to joining Cisco, he spent 14 years at Deloitte, where he was responsible for leader development and performance management redesign efforts in the U.S. He is the co-author with Marcus Buckingham of 9 Lies About Work, a prescription for the world of talent in the 21st century. And it's coming out, actually, by the time you all hear this, the book will be out. If you're watching me, the version that I have is the fancy pre-publication advanced, still has spelling errors in it, maybe. But you'll be able to get the full book ready to go, good to go. Ashley also has a BA in music from the University College at Oxford and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Ashley, welcome. Glad to have you.
Evan, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, you are not, you're either the second or the third graduate from Oxford that I've had as a guest, but I believe the first person with a BA in music. So maybe we should start there. Like, how do you start there and end up where I've just described that you are today? Like, tell us a little bit about your path or your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, and it's funny, and we talk in the book a lot about strengths, and the thing that a lot of folks will say, well, the strength is what I'm good at, and that's actually not usefully precise enough. A strength is really what energizes you. And early on in my life, I was a music geek, if there is such a thing. I played the piano, then I wanted to play in orchestras, so I took up the violin. Then I wasn't very good at the violin, so I took up the viola. Found out, as many in my position found out, that there is a global shortage of viola players, and so if you play the viola, you're allowed in the orchestra. Well,
there you go. So there's the first lesson for everybody today. If you want to be in an orchestra,
be a viola.
Got a better chance if you go with viola.
Be a viola player. And then I was sort of, in all my, music was my team sport growing up. A lot of us play team sports, and that's our experience of how do you work with other people in the service of some objective. And I was totally fascinated by the intra-human communication of musical performance. And it's a very interesting case because, of course, there is a script, if you like. There's a score with notes on it. Yep. So you know what the basics look like, but there are a million different ways of doing it. And what you add on to the music that the composer gives you is ultimately the product of a whole bunch of interactions between people in real time, without a whole bunch of real time, oh, play that louder, because of course you're performing it, right?
Yeah.
So you learn how to read one another's moves. You learn how to communicate wordlessly with people. You learn how to you learn how to anticipate other people. You learn how to read other people's emotions. And that was all completely fascinating to me.
Sounds a little bit like what a leader ought to be able to do.
Well, and so what I then did was I was like, look, now I'm in these orchestras. There's this guy up front with a really interesting job because he's conducting the whole thing. And that seems to take the wordless communication and leadership of a team to a whole other level. So I started doing that. And by the time I finished up at Oxford, I was conducting a couple of orchestras, and I thought that's what I was going to do in life. And then the world said, not so much. It said that by sort of rejecting me from a couple of postgrad courses. And so then I moved into the world of work. And what I discovered was that in the world of work, in the world of teams, we're still facing the same sorts of challenges. I find the same things fascinating. So the through line for me is I'm strengthened, I'm energized by thinking really hard about the challenges of how do we all do better work together? And what does that look like at the sort of microscopic level of detail? Because it's only really when you push in and in and in and in that you begin to find things which are useful and which other people can grab a hold of.
And that other people may not have thought of. The pre-title for the book is called The Free Thinking Leader's Guide to the Real World. I think of this book as a book about the mindset that we need to adopt. We want to be more successful as a leader. And I think of this book as the marketing part of me thinks this is a brilliant book because if you read some of the lies, you may think you disagree with you when you start reading, like almost violently. And you guys everyone listening is going to get a sense of that in a second. But when you're done, you say, well, maybe I don't really disagree at all. But it's this point of thinking it through in a way that perhaps we've not done because we've taken things at a surface level. To me, that's the big idea of the book. So presumptuous of me, I suppose, to say that. But that to me is the big idea of the book.
And that's exactly what we mean by a free thinking leader. We were trying to reach out to people who are sitting there going, look, the received wisdom doesn't seem very helpful for me, or it seems off, or it seems constraining. Is there a better way? And I think the book, in a way, is 9 better ways, if you like, to lead at work.
Yeah, and in case, to your point, it's this. So this sounds like it ought to be the right thing, and it intellectually seems to make sense, but somehow in the real world, it doesn't quite work. So the book it's a perfect title because it says exactly what the book is, which is 9 lies. There are 9 pieces. We don't have time to do all 9. Ashley, in fact, you said before we started, Kevin, I don't want to do all 9. To which I completely agree. So I picked a few that I thought we'd start with. And I really picked them for all of you listening and watching, thinking about what, if I were you rather than me, what I would want us to talk about. So I picked one that's kind of big picture, and then the others really dive into us as leaders at whatever level we're at. So the first one is lie number 3. And there's no test here, Ashley. So I'll give you what the lie is. Lie number 3 is the best companies cascade goals. And there are consultants all over the world saying, you got to cascade the goals. So why is that a lie? What's the problem there?
The problem is that when we say you should cascade goals, we're trying to achieve something by doing that, right? Mm-hmm. We're worried that in our organizations, large organizations, all sorts of people all over the place doing all sorts of stuff, that stuff might not be in some way aligned. And aligned is the word that we hear. And our theory is, if we could only get everybody to pull on the oars in unison, as it were, then we'd be a better organization. And so cascading goals are the mechanism that's been thought up in order to align everybody. Yep. And in case any of our listeners aren't familiar with what a goal cascade looks like, it's probably good to have a little bit of a summary.
Perfect, yep.
And so what tends to happen is these things always have a season, by the way, in large organizations. It's usually in the fall for some reason. I think we come back from our summer holidays and we show up after Labor Day in the United States and everyone's like, what are we going to do at work this year? We don't know. Therefore, we need some goals. So the senior leaders set their goals, and then the level below looks up at the senior leaders' goals and says, well, your goal is X, so my goal should be mini X. And then the level below looks at their leaders' goals and goes, well, your goal was mini X, mine should be mini X. And so on. And so, 3 weeks later, somebody at the bottom of the org chart, poor chap.
By the way, that's at best 3 weeks, because it could be 3 months.
It could be, time goes by while we're all doing this, but somebody at the bottom looks up at their manager's goals, and their manager's goals by this time look like mini X, and they set their goal, which then, this is the beauty of the whole thing, then gets approved back up the chain. and people are approving whether, in fact, mini X is a correct subset of mini X, and also whether it's difficult enough. Because companies are also worried that when you cascade goals, everyone will set themselves easy goals that they can leap over, and then they'll get all sorts of credit for doing easy things. So that all happens, and then the goals are approved. And by this time, it's, as you say, it's probably about January the 1st. And, 3 months have gone by while we've been going back and forth.
That's why we started 3 months before, because we wanted magically on this day called New Year's Day, right?
And then I always imagine that somewhere somebody lets off some sort of a cannon or an 11-gun salute or something. And then we can all start work, because we couldn't start work before because we hadn't been told what to do. Okay, that's the theory, and the theory is that that should promote, in a way, alignment, because everybody's working on a subset of thing, because work is all a nested construct. Okay. And then, of course, what happens is then you get if you're on the receiving end, once you've done all the mini X stuff, you then put the form away and ignore it vociferously.
Until next Labor Day, when we have to start looking at next year's.
Oh no, something else happens first. When someone says, okay, now you've got to do a self-evaluation on how you did against all these goals. And you're like, oh, the goals, the thing I wrote in a form in November. Okay, how did I do on that? I can't remember because the work changed, but I'll make something up because I have to make something up. And then your manager says whether she thinks that you did the thing that you said you did, but she knows also that you're making it up. Okay, that's...
And everybody knows that the world changed 4 times, so they couldn't have, even if they were right to start with, they're not right now. It's a whole other level.
Exactly. So time is going by. So it comes, like many of the lies, they come from a good place. They come from a place of wanting to make things better in some way. And one of the themes that emerges from the book is when we carelessly systematize how we go about these things, very often the system crushes the idea that was the germ of the whole thing, and you finish up with some poor person in November going, how on earth am I to write a sentence as to how I did against this goal that is now irrelevant to my work? And I mean, the other thing that you see across the 9 lies is there are these big systems and these big theoretical constructs. We start talking about it in terms of theory world. But then going along in its own merry way is the real world. And in the real world, work is organized by, you talk to your manager about what you need to do. And by the way, you did that on Labor Day because you'd done it the week before and the week before and the week before, and you do it the week after and the week after and the week after. So you get work. Work doesn't have an 11-gun salute. There's no start line. It's a river.
Process.
It's on running.
Yep.
Goals, in a weird way, are a sort of dam that we helicopter down into our river and disrupt its flow, and they come from some other place, and they're not helping people work. Because actually, what you need to do your best work is not to have somebody tell you what to do. We hire smart people in our companies. We spend a lot of time and energy trying to get really bright folks to come and work with us. We don't need to tell them what to do. We need to tell them why. We need to tell them what it's for. We need to give them a sense of which hill to take. And we need to tell them as much as we can about what's going on in the world today. So what you find in companies that do this brilliantly is you find they're great at cascading, if you like, meaning and purpose, and they have rituals and stories, and they're forever trying to transmit from on high, not what to do, but why
we do this.
And then you find that they're very, very good at plugging people in to all the information they need to figure out, okay, now I understand what the world is, what's going on in the world. I understand where my work fits into that. And I can then figure out what to do, which is to say that we started off with, we do cascaded goals to drive alignment, and we think alignment is coerced. But actually in the real world, alignment is emergent from a whole bunch of people knowing which hill they're going to take and being empowered to go take it.
And in conversation about it, right? So on 2 levels, a word that keeps popping up as I'm listening. And so maybe this is helpful to everyone who's listening to both of us. And that's the word context. Because what's missing so much in in the world of work is context. And what seems obvious to us as a leader isn't obvious to our team because they don't have the context that we have. And so sharing meaning, sharing purpose is providing context. And I think so at the other level, and you've already mentioned the theme that runs through all 9 lies, and certainly you've described very clearly here, is that we end up having the system drive what we're doing because we lost sight of the context. We lost sight of what we were trying to do.
Well,
and to me, context is a huge point of what you've been saying here.
And you can push harder into that, and you can say that the system has actually removed the context because the system has made everything abstract and has said the only important thing is these little sentences for what you're going to do that we're going to measure you on in 11 months' time. And part of the reason that these sorts of cascades are, if you like, calcifying for an organization is that in the incredible time it takes to do it all, the world changes. In other words, the context changes. So these things are not located in the real rhythms of the world. And the only thing that can locate itself in the real rhythms of the world is a person sitting on the team who, instead of going mini X, is plugged into a great source of information about what's going on in the world around them and a great sense of the mission or purpose or objective that their company finds most important, and who is then trusted to figure out how best to get there.
Without going into any details for anyone, it wouldn't matter. That's happening for us in our organization of 15 people right now. There's something that we planned for, hasn't gone quite the way we wanted. But as long as we all understand what the big mission and the big purpose is, we'll rebound from this. We'll figure it out. But if we castigated ourselves for not doing what we thought we wanted to do in this one particular situation, it doesn't help us. Really, we need to learn from what hasn't gone right. But as long as I help everyone keep a picture and everyone understands that bigger context, that bigger mission and purpose, then I got smart people like you're describing, and so does everyone listening, to help make the right decisions and good decisions and better decisions, but they've got to have the data. They got to have the information. They got to have the context.
And I think, I wish we lived in a world where we could take all the energy that's been put into making these systems of direction and apply that same energy to creating systems of purpose, systems of meaning. Because you see a lot of companies, a lot of leaders who like, oh, the meaning bit, yeah, we'll do that at the all hands once a year, and we'll have a nice little slide that says in some nice words that everyone feels good about, and now we've done meaning, and so we can leave meaning alone until we come back to our all hands a year from now. We need to actually invert the cadence and the frequency of these things. Talking about what we're here to do should be a weekly activity or a monthly activity. You shouldn't be able to walk around inside a company without bumping into some manifestation of here's what we hold to be most important.
And here's why we're here. Here's why what I do matches up to that, right?
Right. So I think we need to sort of flip the effort over and get really, really good at making vivid to everybody in our organizations exactly what we're here to do.
So we've done 1 out of 9, and we could spend the rest of our time on that, but we're not going to. I'm going to go to number 5, and line number 5 is people need feedback. They don't? Really? Ashley, we're supposed to give people feedback. What's going on here? What are you talking about?
Well, and not only are we supposed to give them feedback, but there are some other words that go with it. At the moment, certainly, we're hearing a lot about we're meant to give them candid feedback or unvarnished feedback or radical feedback. We're meant to wake up every day, turn to face our colleagues, and transmit to them rigorously the truth of who they are. And the theory goes, therefore, they will somehow grow, right? So again, intent, interesting. Intent, precious. How can we help people grow? But we've skipped past the whole science of how people actually grow, and instead we have a theory that people should grow if we tell them what we know to be true about them. Now, if you unpick that a little bit, you find out that I don't, in a sort of data quality sense, I don't know what's true about you. I only know what's true of my reactions to you. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very different thing. So I can't say, Kevin, here's the truth of Kevin. Secondly, you find out that when you study how we learn, you stop learning when I give you what you perceive to be a threat of feedback.
The minute that I go like this, it's over.
Go, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear. And in fact, there's a bunch of interesting neuroscience that tells us that when I focus you on what you do less well, your brain goes into fight or flight mode and essentially leaves the conversation. So all of a sudden now I'm talking Kevin, but Kevin's brain is off.
I'm on a mental vacation someplace else.
I did PTSD probably. And then the third thing is that embedded in this idea we should give people feedback is the idea that that what's excellent performance for you is something that I can figure out and explain to you. In other words, the excellence in any given field is sort of generalizable and transferable from one person to the other. So I know what being an excellent podcast host is. I should tell you the truth of where you're not being an excellent podcast host, and you will learn to be an excellent podcast host. Okay, the science on each of those things says does not work, is not true. So you go back to the intent and you say, well, what's the intent of all of this? Well, the intent is to help people thrive. The intent is to help people prosper. The intent is to help people grow. What can the science tell us about that? And the science is really, really interesting. It says, firstly, if you've missed a fact, if there's something factual that you're not aware of, I can tell you the fact and you can perform better. If there is a step in some process that you've missed, and we all agree this process has this set of nicely definable steps, and you've missed a step, you're a nurse giving an injection is a great example. There are like 15 steps to giving a safe injection. You forget to sterilize the needle. I can say to you, you've missed a step. Now your patient is not better. Next time, do the step, otherwise you'll hurt people. So I can do facts and steps. The number of jobs in the world, especially in the world of knowledge work, especially in the world of large organizations that are reducible to facts and steps, is vanishingly small and getting smaller and smaller and smaller every day. But the third thing I can do is I can give you my reaction to what happened. I can give you my reaction to your performance, if you like. And I can give you my reaction to something that worked less well, or I can give you my reaction to something that worked really well. When I give you my reaction to something that worked less well, okay, because now I'm not assaulting you with my version of your truth.
Yeah. And I'm no longer in defense mode.
You're no longer in defense mode because I've kept it on my side of the conversation, if you like. You can take that on board and you can do something about it and you will improve. You won't improve to excellence. You will just improve to being sort of adequate, because all of the evidence suggests that when we fix our faults, as much as those are objectively definable, what we get to is the sort of standard. We get to baseline performance. But in order to get you, so we get to baseline, which is like we've gone from negative to zero, if you like. And most of the feedback conversation that's going on in business right now, whether you're talking about Blackwater or you're talking about Netflix, is of this sort. How do you get from negative to zero? If you want to get from zero to infinity, you need to give a reaction to a very different thing, and it's your reaction to when something went really well. Now, if I give you my reaction to something that struck me as a brilliant moment, if I interrupt you, if I catch you in the very instance that happens and go, my goodness me, Kevin, that really landed on me well. That was a powerful thing that you just did. What I'm doing is I'm interrupting your mental process. I'm drawing attention to some pattern in your brain that's pre-existing, asking you to explore that, capture it, and do more of it in the future.
And I might have been completely unaware that I did it or that it was useful, good, effective, etc. Right?
Or you might have been sitting there going, I'm pretty good at that. But by drawing attention to it, by interrupting you, by making that the most important piece of reaction I share with you, what I'm saying is, I think, you may disagree, I think that thing you just did turned up to 11 would make you infinitely more powerful. So that's how we get from 0 to infinity. We find ways of drawing our colleagues' attention to things that they do that work brilliantly well, and their brains will then figure out, okay, what was I feeling when I did that? What was I thinking? How did I get to that point? How could I do that more? How could I do that more powerfully? And the learning, again, is generated from within. You don't learn when I tell you what to do unless it's a thing with facts or steps. You learn when your brain goes, oh, that worked. Maybe if I did it like this, it would work even better. Exactly. You learn by building on what's good.
Discovery learning that comes from within. Yeah. So, here's why I said earlier that I think from a marketing perspective or from a communication perspective, the book is brilliant, because we've just been talking for however many minutes about the fact that the lie is that people need feedback. Well, it's really the fact. The fact is they need feedback differently than they're getting.
Well,
respond to that, because that's how I would take what we just said.
Yeah, I mean, and words really do matter. And we understand today in society feedback to be a thing that I give to you about you.
Oh, yeah. And it's spaghetti-o. And I'd immediately go here and all of that stuff, right?
And so the words I encourage folks to use instead is, I don't give you feedback. I just give you my reaction to what worked. Because it's mine. It doesn't cross over between us. It doesn't land on you. It doesn't create the sensation in you of being assaulted in some way. And so I think that the evidence would say people don't need feedback. People need attention. We all crave attention in some way. There's all sorts of interesting examples in the book, from the lessons of social media, the lessons of an electrical parts factory called the Hawthorne plant, the Hawthorne Works, that we go into in some detail. So people need attention. And the most important sort of attention we can give them is our attention to what worked.
For sure. 100%. So I'm really struggling with which other one for us to talk about, because there's two that I would love for us to, but we really don't have time to talk about one. And so the last lie, I really love this chapter. I think we are in complete agreement about it. And the lie is, so this is what I'm going to pick. Lie number 9, leadership is a thing.
And the question is, if it isn't, then what's going on, right?
There you go.
So we, in large organizations, we make a thing of leadership, certainly. And one of the ways you see it, and many folks will have encountered this, I'm sure, is it's these lists of things. And we say, well, and there's a whole cottage industry, by the way, apparently dedicated to perfecting the list of leadership things. And so the sorts of things that come up on the list are: leadership is about strategy, leadership is about vision, leadership is about inspiration, leadership is about oratory very often, leadership is about relationships, leadership is about agility,
resilience. Let's keep going.
Empathy, authenticity is a big one. Leadership is definitely about authenticity. It comes up on all the lists. And so where we start in the chapter is we start by going, okay, are there any successful leaders we can find in the real world, so much for the theory, in the real world, who exemplify all of these things?
All. The key word being all. All.
Yeah, all of them.
The answer is no.
If they're all required, then surely all great leaders would have all of them. And it takes maybe 32 seconds of thinking to come up with a big, long list of leaders who are respected leaders who don't have one or many of the things on the list. It's interesting to think about, you can think about, the great example is Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And did Steve Jobs have empathy? Gosh, I think you'd struggle to find a lot of people who felt that encountering Steve Jobs. Does Bill Gates, is he really good at giving speeches? Certainly not compared to Steve Jobs. So is oratory there? Did Microsoft have the right strategy in the early 2000s? I think what's happened since would indicate that maybe they were missing on strategy. So you start looking at real leaders in the real world and you go, goodness me, they seem to not have the things on the leadership list. And that calls into question for me whether leadership is a thing, because we think it's a thing and we think it's an important thing to have. And where you finish up going instead is you say, well, is there anything useful that we can say about leaders that will take us in a more productive direction? And of course, you think about it for a little bit and you go, well, if a leader doesn't have followers, then they're not really a leader, are they?
They're just taking a walk.
Then, yeah, they're off on a frolic of their own, maybe.
Yep.
And so you then go, okay, well, if leaders are people with followers, and you can define followers in many different ways, but a good definition is people who are going the extra mile, maybe, for somebody. Then why would you follow somebody? Why would you follow somebody? And that's a really interesting question, because what you find when you look at leaders with followers is they don't have all of the leadership things, but they have a few things that they are brilliantly good at. A few things that they are brilliantly good at. And we call these spikes in the book. And it's like you as a follower, what do you need in the world? You want some measure of confidence in the future. The future is a scary place for all of us. We don't like uncertainty. We want some measure of, give me a little sense of what shape my future could be. And you see a leader who's really good at a few things and you go, goodness me, they've seen around more corners than I have. They stand for something that's really important to me. They're super effective at making this thing come to pass in the world. Because of that, my level of confidence in the future just went up a little bit. It just went up a little bit.
And I will follow
you
because of that.
You give me certainty. It's a trade. It's a barter, if you like. And what it is that we're following, therefore, is the spikes. It's like we hook onto them in our search for a way to make the future a little bit more certain. And what you then see, if you go now back to all of the different leaders that you can call to mind, you can very easily say, in much less than 32 seconds, here's what this person was great at. Here's why I would follow this person. And what that means for our listeners is that if you're sitting there going, how can I grow as a leader? The first question is, why would anyone follow me? And the second question is, what is it that I'm really energized by and really powerful at doing? And how can I magnify that so that my followers have got something to hook onto?
Yep. So long-term watchers, viewers, listeners of this podcast would know that often I do something called the fast break. I made the conscious choice to not do that because I wanted to dive into another one of the 9 lies. So so just so you know, Ashley, the fast break is I would have given you 3 words. You had to like give me your freewheeling thoughts on those ideas, but I'm saving you from that fact. And I'm going to go right to my final 3 questions.
Okay.
So it's very clear as I have the good fortune of talking with you live and I can ask you whatever I want to ask and everyone listening can only sort of take it all in. And I'm having the chance to sort of watch you in real time. Clear that you're passionate about what you do, clear that you're spending a lot of time doing your work and doing great work. But the question is, what do you do for fun?
What's interesting, so we can go all the way back to...
Are we back to the viola? That's the question.
Well, actually, I don't do that so much more. I still try and play the piano, by the way, so that's still there. But actually, I cook a lot. And that's probably the thing at the moment that I have the most time for, because it actually doesn't take a huge amount of time. And for me, cooking is an exercise in creativity as well. And it's really interesting. My son is 17. He also loves to cook, but his observation is he cooks with me. He sometimes cooks with a friend of his. His observation is that everybody he cooks with approaches it in a different way. He says of me, I approach it like an engineer because I have a little bit of the sort of data scientist bent in me. His friend approaches it like an artist. And so it's another little truism that strengths aren't jobs. What energizes you isn't a role. It's what you bring to a particular activity. And I think what's so funny is that we like to subdivide the world into work and life. And we actually talk about this a little bit in one of the other lies.
Yes.
And that's an artificial subdivision that I think is maybe ending its utility, getting to the end of its usefulness as an idea. Because actually the question confronting all of us is, we only have so many days on the planet. How can we fill those days with the things that energize us the most? And so it's not, if you like, the categories don't think are work and life. I think they're what do you love and what do you loathe, and how can you do more of the first and less of the second. And that should play out across what we do for a salary, what we do on our own time. And so for me, as a cook, I suppose I'm expressing my want to understand the inner workings of something and understand how to optimize something.
Cool. So the only question that I told you ahead of time, and this is it, is what is something you're reading now? And you told me, I know exactly what I'm going to tell everybody. So what is that?
I'm reading the 2-volume biography of Margaret Thatcher by a guy named Charles Moore. And every time I see this book on my nightstand, volume 1 is 700 pages long. Volume 2 is 700 or so pages long. So every time I see it on my nightstand, I feel kind of intimidated, because that's a lot of reading. And I have the slight problem that when I read in the evenings, I fall asleep. So I'm reading 700 pages, like 3 pages at a time.
Okay, so your book is 250 pages.
Right. So I can get through that in about 9 sleeps, actually.
But this is like 6 times that long. Just say
this is 6 times that long. And what's fascinating about it for me is when you read biography of leaders, you don't have to go through the models that we put on leaders in our world of theory. What you find out, and certainly at the length of, in total, 1,400 pages, is what it was like on the ground. And I'm just enduringly fascinated by seeing that sort of up close, because that, for me, is where you find the next insight and the next aha about this fascinating topic.
So actually, having written thousands of blog posts, one of the most read I ever wrote was why you ought to read biographies, or like how biographies can help you really learn. And so we're together on that. Yet another thing that we're together on. So we've been talking to Ashley Goodall about his brand new book with Marcus Buckingham called 9 Lies About Work. Where can we learn more about the book? Where can we get the book? What else do you want to tell us about how to get connected with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn a lot and Instagram a little. So probably find me on LinkedIn is the best advice there. The book is available, I think by the time we release this, the book will be available from all major booksellers. And for folks overseas, certainly April the 2nd is any place in the world that speaks English. All the English language markets will be available there on April the 2nd, and then the translation copies shortly after that, as we sort of get the translations done around the world. So thank you ever so much for having me, and I hope our listeners enjoy the book.
I hope that they make the decision to buy a copy of the book. But before they go, and before all of us go, the question I have for all of you as listeners is the same question I ask you every week, which is, now what? What are you going to do with this? What action are you going to take? There was many moments of insight here, and I won't try to predict for you or tell you which ones were most important to you, but rather I would challenge you to think about what struck you, what was valuable to you, what could you translate and use in your work as a leader. And please don't, even though we talked about some things that are higher level, and well, I can't go change the way we do cascading of goals. Well, but what can you do as a leader at whatever level you're at to mitigate some of the challenges with that, or to provide enough context back into it so you can get better results for you and your team and the organization. So I think, and if you're only listening, Ashley is nodding, so he's in agreement with me. The challenge here is to think about how you can use this, because I think the heart of both of us is that this wasn't about entertaining you, but rather to prod you, to gently prod you to think about what you could do to be different, to create better results for you and your team. We hope that you'll do exactly that. I hope you'll come back again in the future and join us again, everybody, for another episode. And if you loved this, you should go back and listen to some more. And you can always go join us on our Facebook group to have a hand in what we're doing, to talk more about what we've been talking about. And you can join that Facebook group by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook. So Ashley, thanks so much for being here. It was a total pleasure to have you.
Great. My pleasure to chat with you. Fun conversation.
And everybody, we're back again next week. So I hope you'll join us then for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.